The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, says that it's overwhelmed by the number of people displaced by Israel's war on Gaza. It says 600,000 displaced Palestinians have fled their homes and are taking refuge at its shelters. At least 40 of its facilities, that includes schools and clinics, have been impacted by Israeli strikes. The agency says its shelters are hosting currently 4 times their capacity. Many families are sleeping in the streets. Meanwhile, Oxfam is warning that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. The agency says just 2% of the normal food supply has been delivered after Israel imposed a total blockade. Oxfam described the situation as horrific and says 2.3 million people are being collectively punished in contravention of international humanitarian law. Bushra Khalidi is policy lead in the occupied Palestinian territory in Israel at Oxfam. You're joining us from Ramallah, Bushra. So your group, your organization, studied this. What have been your findings?
So before the hostilities escalated, Israel had imposed for 16 years an illegal blockade on Gaza, and 104 food trucks at the time were entering Gaza daily. That's a truck every 14 minutes. Now, only 30 trucks have delivered food since the weekend, only in the southern part of Gaza, through the Rafah crossing, averaging 1 truck every 3 hours and 12 minutes. The significant drop in food deliveries is creating an immediate and life-threatening situation for 2.2 million people, of which half are children, who are now in desperate need.
So that's where you get the 2% of their usual food supply that they've been getting since this started. What are people eating?
My family is in Gaza. Yesterday, they shared 3 cans of tuna between about 20 people with cucumber. They have to queue, as your reporter said, for hours for water or even to get some bread. Prices have flown up the roof. Clean water is almost non-existent, with only 3 liters available per person. The UN sets 15 liters as the bare minimum, even in humanitarian emergencies.
Hold on, can you say those numbers again? Can you say those numbers again for our viewers? The water that they have versus the water that people need.
So far, people have only 3 liters a day per person. The UN sets 15 liters as the minimum, bare minimum, even in humanitarian emergencies, as the bar. So that's 5 times less than what the UN sets as the bare minimum for a person to survive. As your reporter also mentioned, numerous bakeries and supermarkets have been destroyed and damaged. Those that are operational, of course, cannot meet the local demand for essentials like fresh bread. Gaza's only working wheat mill is non-operational because there's no fuel, and it runs, of course, on electricity. Essential items like food, flour, oil, sugar are present in undestroyed warehouses, but delivering them is nearly impossible due to the damaged roads.
This is interesting. I think a lot of people don't know this, Bushra. You're saying that there are basic foodstuffs. Even as people are hungry, there are basic foodstuffs that are currently undamaged in warehouses. What is happening to those?
Well, they can't reach them because the roads are so destroyed and there's constant bombardment that people can't reach that food. And there's lack of fuel, so you don't have also the possibility to move those stocks around because there's nowhere safe in Gaza. They're bombarding the north like the south. We're finding, actually, my family has gone back to Gaza City today because they could not sustain the living conditions they were in while taking refuge in the middle area. Over 15,000 farmers have lost their crops. 10,000 livestock breeders are struggling, and the fishing industry is completely paralyzed. Gaza has a huge fishing industry, but they can't go to the sea to fish. The current, of course, electricity blackout is affecting the refrigeration of food supplies, if there was any.
Bushra, can I jump in? There's an important part of your statement, which I read, that says there were foodstuffs, obviously, that came in on these trucks, these 60 or so trucks that have been allowed into the Gaza Strip since the weekend.
30.
I beg your pardon?
30 trucks.
Okay, that's not the number that I had. But that lentils and pasta in particular were allowed to enter into the Gaza Strip. Your statement mentions that, and also mentions that actually that can't always be consumed because of a lack of electricity and a lack of drinking water.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people can't cook. There's no gas to cook. There's no electricity to cook. And there's no clean water to cook. So you can't make lentil soup or rice without clean water and without gas. Maybe some families have some supplies, but generally speaking, it has been mostly canned food, what people have been surviving on.
How much longer can this last? I know it's very difficult to obviously put a date on it, but you're telling me that people are living right now off of tuna cans and cucumber. Presumably, they don't have unlimited resources of tuna cans and cucumber.
Days?
I beg your pardon?
It's impossible to, we're unable to operate. Our operations have been halted. We're only able to do very small distributions of hygiene kits, soap, toothpaste, things like this. Our partners are also trying to live the day. So our assessment, our ability to assess the situation with very precise data is extremely difficult to really, and we can't reach people. We can't reach affected communities to also do those assessments to understand really how much supplies do they have left. I would expect that people from with better incomes might have more supplies, but people that are struggling, knowing that more than half of Gaza lives under the poverty line, are already starving.
Gaza's population is very young. What does it do to children, especially the youngest children, to be malnourished? I mean, look, staying alive because you're eating the bare minimum, that's one thing. But to actually be malnourished, what are you looking at that in terms of what it does in the medium term, the long term to these young bodies?
We are developing this analysis further, but I mean, from just common sense, a child should be having at least 3 meals a day with 2 snacks in between. A good portion of protein and vegetables, including carbs and all the vitamins that they need, especially that they're growing. That's malnutrition, and malnutrition has severe long-term consequences on children, not only actually physical consequences, but mental health consequences. I had worked for another international organization that had commissioned a report 3 years ago after the 2021 war, and it found that 4 out of 5 children felt abandoned by the world.
Bushra Khalidi, your policy lead in the occupied Palestinian territory in Israel at the international aid organization Oxfam. We thank you for taking the time to join us on the program today.
Thank you.